A powerful formation of Chinese warships, military aircraft, and Coast Guard vessels has operated around Bajo de Masinloc, raising the pressure on the Philippines at one of the most sensitive flashpoints in the South China Sea, known internationally as Scarborough Shoal and called Huangyandao by Beijing. Bajo de Masinloc lies roughly 120 nautical miles west of the Philippine island of Luzon. Its position places it close to major shipping routes, valuable fishing grounds, and the approaches to several Philippine military and commercial centers. The latest confrontation is unfolding while Ferdinand Marcos Jr. remains president of the Philippines and commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Philippines. In Beijing, Xi Jinping continues to serve as Chinese president, general secretary of the Communist Party of China, and chairman of China's Central Military Commission, placing him at the top of the political and military command structure overseeing the People's Liberation Army. There is no publicly released document proving that Xi personally signed a tactical order for this specific operation. However, the ships and aircraft belong to military forces under the authority of the Central Military Commission that he chairs. The deployment therefore represents more than an ordinary Coast Guard patrol. It is a demonstration of military power carried out under China's present national leadership. On August 1st, China announced that its military and Coast Guard had conducted joint naval and air combat exercises around the shoal. Chinese authorities said the operation took place in the surrounding waters and airspace and was intended to test combat readiness, rapid reinforcement, and the ability of different branches of the Chinese military to operate together. The force displayed around the shoal was significant. Reporting based on Chinese military releases identified a Type 05 2D guided missile destroyer, a Type 071 amphibious landing ship, a Type 054, a frigate, and a Type 056, a corvette. Landing craft, helicopters, and other supporting assets were also shown operating with the group. In the sky, China deployed H-6K bombers carrying YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles, a KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft was also reported in the area. These aircraft give China the ability to detect, track, and potentially threaten naval vessels across a wide section of the northern South China Sea. Subsequent Philippine monitoring indicated that the activity conducted between July 31st and August 1st involved five Chinese warships, one replenishment vessel, two hovercraft, and at least two helicopters. The presence of a replenishment ship was especially notable because such vessels allow naval groups to remain at sea longer without returning to port for fuel, food, and other supplies. The Chinese formation was not reported to have attacked Philippine territory or opened fire. The operation was presented as an exercise. Nevertheless, the choice of location carried a clear political message. China was demonstrating that it could rapidly concentrate naval and air power around a shoal located much closer to the Philippines than to the Chinese mainland. Bajo de Masinloc is approximately 200 kilometers from the western coast of the Philippines. Hainan, the nearest major Chinese landmass, is more than 870 kilometers away. Geography alone does not decide sovereignty, but it explains why Filipinos view the repeated arrival of Chinese military and Coast Guard vessels with such concern. The armed forces of the Philippines said it had detected and followed the Chinese activity. Philippine authorities initially questioned whether Beijing's public description matched what had actually occurred, but military monitoring later confirmed that Chinese naval exercises had taken place near the shoal. Rear Admiral Roy Vincent Trinidad, the armed forces of the Philippines spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, said military activities or demonstrations do not alter the legal status of maritime features or the Philippines' maritime entitlements under international law. That statement reflects Manila's wider approach. The Philippines does not have a navy equal in size or firepower to China's fleet. Its strategy, therefore, combines military surveillance, Coast Guard patrols, diplomatic protests, international legal action, public disclosure, and security cooperation with allies. Philippine forces continuously monitor Chinese vessels around Bajo de Masinloc, Ayungin Shoal, Escoda, Shoal, and other contested areas. During July alone, the armed forces of the Philippines recorded 48 Chinese naval and Coast Guard vessels across 4 major features in the West Philippine Sea. 22 of those vessels were recorded around Bajo de Masinloc. According to Philippine figures, that group included 19 China Coast Guard vessels and 3 People's Liberation Army Navy ships. Another 14 Chinese vessels were detected near Ayungin Shoal, while additional vessels were monitored near Escoda Shoal and Pag-asa Island. Those monthly figures show that the August drills did not occur in isolation. They followed a sustained Chinese presence involving Coast Guard cutters, military warships, and other vessels operating in waters claimed by the Philippines. The immediate political background was the Philippines' decision to deposit an official nautical chart of Bajo de Masinloc with the United Nations. The chart depicted the shoal's normal baselines as well as the outer limits of a 12 nautical mile territorial sea and a 24 nautical mile contiguous zone. Manila said the filing strengthened the legal certainty surrounding its position under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UN SCLOS. The Philippine government regards the rocks forming Bajo de Masinloc as part of its national territory and argues that the surrounding maritime zones must be determined according to international law. China immediately rejected that action. China's foreign ministry said Huangdao is China's inherent territory. It described the Philippine baselines as illegal and invalid and warned that China would respond to actions it regarded as violations of its sovereignty and maritime rights. The dispute therefore involves 2 different legal and historical narratives. Manila bases its position on Philippine law, historical administration, geographical proximity, and international maritime rules. Beijing argues that the shoal has long belonged to China and rejects Philippine measures that treat it as Philippine territory. The 2016 South China Sea arbitration is central to understanding the dispute, but the ruling is often described inaccurately. The tribunal did not decide which country owns Scarborough Shoal. Questions of territorial sovereignty were outside the scope of the proceedings. It also did not establish a maritime boundary between China and the Philippines. What the tribunal did decide was that China's claims to broad historic rights across waters inside its expansive South China Sea claim had no legal basis where they exceeded the maritime entitlements permitted by UN SCLOS. It also determined that Scarborough Shoal is a high tide feature capable of generating a territorial sea, but not an exclusive economic zone of its own. Most importantly, for the fishermen who depend on the area, the tribunal found that Filipino, Chinese, and other regional fishermen had traditionally used the shoal and possessed traditional fishing rights there. The tribunal concluded that China had violated its obligation to respect the traditional fishing rights of Philippine fishermen when it prevented them from entering the shoal after the maritime standoff that began in 2012. China rejected the proceedings and continues to say it will not accept the award. This legal distinction matters. The arbitration strengthened the Philippines' maritime case and rejected the legal basis of China's sweeping historic rights claim. It did not award sovereignty over the shoal to Manila. That unresolved sovereignty dispute has allowed both governments to maintain completely opposing positions. Philippine officials refer to Bajo de Masinloc as an integral part of Philippine territory. China describes the same feature as an inherent part of China. For fishermen, however, the dispute is not an abstract legal argument. It affects whether they can approach the lagoon shelter inside the shoal during storms and fish in waters used by generations of coastal communities from Zambales and Pangasinan. Filipino fishermen have repeatedly described being blocked, followed, or ordered away by Chinese vessels. Some have become reluctant to make the long journey because of the possibility of confrontation, damage to their boats, or the loss of valuable fishing time. A decade after the 2016 award, fishermen interviewed near the Philippine coast said fear of harassment continued to discourage them from returning to the shoal. That fear was reinforced by confrontations in July 2026. The Philippine Coast Guard accused Chinese vessels of using water cannons against Philippine government ships near Bahangkoin 2 consecutive days. During one encounter, a Chinese Coast Guard ship reportedly passed within approximately 7 meters of a Philippine fisheries vessel, creating what Philippine authorities described as a serious danger of collision. Rear Admiral J. Tariela, spokesperson for the Philippine Coast Guard on West Philippine Sea matters, said the PCG strongly condemns the dangerous and unprofessional actions of the China Coast Guard. The Chinese Coast Guard gave a completely different account. It accused Philippine vessels of illegally entering the area, ignoring repeated warnings, and gathering around waters claimed by China. Beijing said its officers had taken lawful control measures, including warnings, blocking maneuvers, and the use of water cannons. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said the Philippine side should immediately stop the infringement, provocation, and hype. The exchange reveals a dangerous pattern. Each country considers its own vessels to be operating legally. Each accuses the other of provocation. Each uses official statements, photographs, and video recordings to strengthen its account before domestic and international audiences. The danger is that vessels operating close together have very little time to react. A misjudged turn, an equipment failure, or an overly aggressive interception could produce a collision, injuries, or deaths. Once military ships are operating alongside Coast Guard and civilian vessels, the consequences of such an accident become even more serious. Another source of tension is China's decision to declare the area a national nature reserve. Beijing established what it calls the Huangyan Island National Nature Reserve in 2025 and later issued new administrative rules for the area. The Chinese regulations prohibit activities including unauthorized fishing, mining, coral collection, and the harvesting of giant clams. China also announced that its Coast Guard would maintain regular patrols to enforce the restrictions. Beijing presents the reserve as an environmental protection measure. Manila sees it as an attempt to impose Chinese domestic authority over a disputed future and to create an administrative structure that could strengthen China's control. The Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs rejected the latest Chinese measures and called on Beijing to withdraw them. Philippine Maritime Affairs official Rogelio Villanueva Jr. said, "We call on China to refrain from implementing these measures, withdraw its issuances." The Philippine government maintained that China had no authority to regulate access to Bajo de Masinloc in a manner that disregarded Philippine sovereignty, maritime rights, and the 2016 arbitral ruling. Questions about China's long-term intentions became even more urgent in June when the Philippines detected a floating platform inside the shoal. Images released by Philippine officials showed a square structure made from wooden planks and flotation devices. People and an antenna were visible on the platform. Philippine authorities believed it had been deployed by Chinese research vessels, although Beijing did not publicly accept responsibility. China said scientific research in the area was legitimate because it considered the Shoal Chinese territory. The Philippines filed a diplomatic protest and warned that it would not permit Bajo de Masinloc to be transformed into another artificial island. Rear Admiral Trinidad said the Philippine security mission included preventing Bajo de Masinloc from being developed into another man-made island. The floating structure was later removed, but the episode revived memories of other South China Sea features where temporary or limited Chinese activity was eventually followed by large-scale reclamation and the construction of permanent facilities. No comparable island building has been confirmed at Bajo de Masinloc. Even so, Philippine officials continue to watch for construction equipment, survey ships, platforms, buoys, or other changes that could indicate a more permanent Chinese presence. The military imbalance remains a central reality. China possesses one of the world's largest navies, supported by a substantial Coast Guard, maritime militia, long-range aircraft, missiles, satellites, and bases constructed elsewhere in the South China Sea. The Philippines is modernizing its armed forces, but its fleet is smaller and possesses more limited air defense and anti-ship capabilities. The deployment of a Type 052D destroyer, an amphibious ship frigates, corvettes, and missile-carrying bombers demonstrated that Beijing could bring several layers of military power into the area at the same time. It could monitor the sea from the air, defend the formation, transport personnel and equipment, and threaten ships operating at considerable distances. That does not mean China is preparing to launch an immediate attack. Military exercises are also used for training, deterrence, signaling, and psychological pressure. But the choice to display those capabilities near Bajo de Masinloc was intended to show that China has the means to challenge any Philippine attempt to alter the situation there. The Philippines' response is built less around matching China's ship for ship and more around preventing Beijing from exercising uncontested control. Philippine naval and Coast Guard vessels conduct patrols, challenge foreign ships by radio, document encounters and escort fisheries missions. Aircraft and surveillance systems track vessels from a distance. Diplomatic officials file protests and circulate evidence to foreign governments. The government has also strengthened defense cooperation with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other partners. Joint exercises have increasingly focused on maritime awareness, coastal defense, communication, and the ability to operate together during a crisis. The United States and the Philippines remain bound by their 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. Joint statements have clarified that an armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including Coast Guard vessels in the South China Sea, could invoke treaty commitments. That protection does not automatically apply to every water cannon incident or blocking maneuver, but it increases the stakes if a confrontation causes deaths, destroys a Philippine government vessel, or escalates into the use of military weapons. During regional meetings in Manila following the July confrontations, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio described China's actions in the South China Sea as disturbing and reiterated support for the Philippines as a treaty ally. China argues that greater American and allied military activity is destabilizing the region. Beijing frequently describes joint exercises near contested waters as provocations designed to contain China. The Philippines responds that partnerships are necessary because of the scale of Chinese power and the frequency of confrontations involving its vessels and fishermen. Manila says its activities are defensive, lawful, and conducted within waters where it possesses sovereign rights or territorial claims. The strategic contest at Bajo de Masinloc is therefore taking place on several levels at once. At sea, Coast Guard ships and naval vessels compete for physical presence. In the air, surveillance aircraft and military patrols monitor movements and demonstrate reach. In diplomatic forums, each government accuses the other of violating international law. At the United Nations, the Philippines is documenting its maritime position through charts and legal submissions. In public information campaigns, both countries release carefully selected images and statements to shape how the world understands each encounter. And for ordinary fishermen, the outcome determines whether they can safely reach traditional fishing grounds without being driven away. President Marcos's administration has made clear that it intends to continue Philippine operations in the West Philippine Sea. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, currently led by General Romeo Bronner Jr., says monitoring and maritime patrols will continue despite the presence of larger Chinese formations. China, under President Xi Jinping, is equally determined to maintain its position. The August operation showed that Beijing is prepared to support Coast Guard control with advanced naval ships and combat aircraft whenever it believes its claim is being challenged. Neither side appears prepared to surrender its position. Yet neither government publicly says it wants a war. That leaves Bajo de Masinloc in a dangerous middle ground, not an active battlefield, but far from peaceful, not occupied by a permanent military base, but guarded by a persistent Chinese presence, and not legally settled despite the major findings of the 2016 arbitration. The immediate challenge for both countries is preventing the contest from crossing the line between coercion and armed conflict. For the Philippines, defending Bajo de Masinloc means continuing to sail, monitor, document, and protest. It means supporting fishermen, reinforcing legal claims, and ensuring that Chinese ships do not operate without being challenged. For China, the naval and air deployment is intended to demonstrate that its claim is backed by the region's most powerful military force. The balance of ships may favor Beijing, but the Philippines is relying on geography, international law, alliances, and continued presence to ensure that the dispute is not decided by military strength alone. The latest arrival of Chinese warships has therefore done more than increase the number of vessels around a remote group of rocks. It has brought the unresolved struggle over sovereignty, fishing rights, international law, and regional security back into full view. Bajo de Masinloc remains small on the map, but the forces gathering around it show why this isolated shoal has become one of Asia's most consequential maritime flashpoints.